What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION and there's so much stuff to go over today. I am drowning in information right now. But this video we packed full of nonsense to decipher. From the owners of Baldur's Gate slashing jobs due to pushing identity politics, a comic book legend taking on the cancel pigs within the comic industry, and Disney's performance getting blasted, there's a lot to cover here. So let's keep it as simple as we can and go story by story. To begin, let's look at Hasbro, who's the mega corporation that owns quite a lot of things we all love, from the Dungeons & Dragons IP, Magic the Gathering, and stuff like Transformers as well. It's safe to say Hasbro has a stranglehold on a lot of things that I've loved my whole life. Well, from thatparkplace.com we have this article titled, Transformers, Dungeons & Dragons, and Magic the Gathering maker Hasbro to slash nearly 20% of its workforce due to market headwinds. This all began when the CEO of Hasbro, whose name is Chris Cox, sent out an email telling employees that 1,100 jobs have been slashed from the toy giant. This now puts the number near 2,000 jobs lost for Hasbro in 2023, since they already laid off around 800 people earlier this year too. It's never good when ordinary hardworking people lose their jobs. And like I always say, it's also never the fault of these people who've lost their jobs either, well, usually anyway. Whatever decisions led to these financial failures have and always will lie with the people who make the decisions, your managers and your executives. Pretty much every part of Hasbro has dropped significantly in terms of revenue from toys sold and other merchandise. The only part of Hasbro that really skyrocketed this year was unsurprisingly their games division, which blew up by around 40%, which is obviously thanks to Baldur's Gate 3. Which is based on Dungeons & Dragons, which they own the license to. Its entertainment division dropped 42%, which means their movies didn't do well. And, well, yeah, Honor Among Thieves bombed, and pretty much everything outside of Baldur's Gate 3 has not done well for Hasbro this year. This doesn't surprise me at all, since Hasbro has been filling their most popular brands with ESG over the last few years. From Transformers confirming that robots can be in lesbian relationships to RC being confirmed as transgender. Which, if you know anything about Transformers, the general concept of gender doesn't really mean much considering they're robots. And these examples are nothing but nonsense used to score brownie points within echo chambers. Then of course you have D&D and Magic the Gathering that have gone out of their way to chase the woke crowd by doing moronic things like turning legacy characters into race-swapped versions, for no other reason than to push diversity. Look at Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, who's now black, when in all honesty, I actually like the design a lot. I think it's a cool character look, but it's not Aragorn. And this should have instead been a new character within a new Lord of the Rings story instead. But of course, like every company, none of them have any real morals. And they just shift their priorities to align with whatever is considered morally just or acceptable at the time. All these changes that Hasbro has implemented into their core brands has led to their actual audiences rejecting these ideas, leaving shelves full of merchandise nobody is buying, and this is why you have 1,100 people losing their jobs right before Christmas. And the sad part that I always hated about companies laying people off before the holidays is that during this period, most companies have a hiring freeze implemented until the new year. So a ton of people who likely had no choice but to go along with transgender Transformers and race-swapped legacy Tolkien characters ended up getting the boot and are now entering 2024 jobless, wondering what they're gonna do next. And the people who likely gave the okay to do these moronic things are still employed and will face no backlash internally. Cause, like Disney and others, many of these corporations have been infiltrated with so much rot, nothing short of a purge will save them. Speaking of Disney, they've been called out by South Carolina of all people. And their treasurer, whose name is Curtis Loftus, who's this guy in the glasses on the left here, is calling for South Carolina to just dump their over $105 million of stock in Disney over what he calls structural rot within the company. As Curtis puts it, the decision to divest has to do with Disney's management abandoning their fiduciary responsibilities. Curtis went on to really say what he means, and I quote, I think it's clear to anybody paying attention that there's a structural rot inside of Disney. It's deep, it's pervasive, and I suspect Bob Iger, since his return as a CEO, now realizes it can't be fixed. People sometimes forget that ESG has nothing to do with investing. ESG is a speech and behavior code that was created by the left and delivered to everybody else under these virtuous circumstances. The sane, sober, talented, mature people are gone, and now you have the gender studies crowd running Disney. That's why their movies are flops and their market cap I think is about half what it used to be. It's a tremendous loss to America. We all grew up on Disney, end quote. While Disney shares have risen by 4% recently, it's still around 50% down compared to their high of March 2021, which was sitting at around $201 a share, so things are looking pretty bleak, and as WDW Pro puts it, who, by the way, I was on a live stream with Pro, Script Doctor, J. Jonah Campbell, and more recently. You can check that out on WDW Pro's channel, by the way. But anyway, Pro said previously that Disney's toy sales were down 65%. And things have gotten so bad that the lucrative partnerships between Disney and places like Hasbro have been suffering ever since both of these companies began to pander. Pro stated that Disney's retail when it comes to Marvel and Star Wars has dropped around 40%. And Hasbro actually decided to not pursue a deal of their own volition when it came to making toys based on Ahsoka's Disney Plus show. Because both parties probably looked at the interest in Ahsoka and went, well, there's basically zero money to be made here. And nobody cares whatsoever about these characters at all anyway. So besides a very limited run of toys being made in order to satisfy the collectors out there, generally speaking, toys and collectible sales are in the dumps, and this also connects to why Hasbro has to slash so many jobs as well. Because obviously, if kids aren't getting their parents to buy them toys, then no money is getting made. Which is a shame, but hey, that's what happens when you make stuff that nobody cares about. Speaking of things nobody cares about, Disney is apparently going to announce in the coming month or two that The Mandalorian Season 4 is going to be a movie instead. This rumor comes courtesy of Jeff Snyder of the Hot Mic podcast, who said, and I quote, "A couple of months ago, I also shot this one down, there were rumors that Season 4 of The Mandalorian could be turned into a movie. At the time, I don't think this was necessarily the case, however, this is what I am starting to hear. That the odds are in that project's favor. Whatever the Season 4 of The Mandalorian turns out to be, whoever is in it, whatever shape it takes, it is looking like that could be the next Star Wars movie. And that may be the thing that's announced before the end of the year. I think that Star Wars is anxious to make an announcement. I don't think it will necessarily be before the end of the year, especially because the town starts to shut down basically next week. But I think that those Mandalorian Season 4 movie rumors, I think there was something to those. That's not confirmed, that is just a rumor at this point, it remains a rumor, but when I start hearing it from my person, then it's like, oh, when there's smoke, there's fire, end quote. If this does get announced, I think this will be a box office failure, and let me tell you why. Like I said, I was on the WDW Pro livestream recently, and on there I explained how the reason why films such as the Marvels failed is because in order to understand them, you have to do homework now. Before, you just watched 2 or 3 Marvel films a year and you were caught up on everything. It was clean, it was neat, and it was very easy to follow because it wasn't a massive time sink for really anybody. If you wanted to be up to date on the MCU, you had to spare maybe 6 or 7 hours a year in order to do it. Even if you're busy, you can squeeze out some time to watch at least 3 movies a year. But now you got Disney Plus and all of these TV shows introducing characters the average consumer will have no idea about. This is a big reason why, in my opinion, the Marvels failed. Because the average viewer would look at the poster and see Captain Marvel standing with 2 nobodies. And since these characters didn't debut in a movie that was 2 hours long, but instead 2 separate TV shows that were hours long each. Well, in order to understand the who or why of what the hell was happening in the Marvels was just that. It was homework. So now that brings us to The Mandalorian, which has 3 seasons of television behind it. The average viewer likely doesn't even have the time to watch 3 seasons of a show. So of course, making a movie based on Mandalorian will have a similar effect to what happened with the Marvels. Not to mention, Mando's seasons intersect and weave with other shows like Book of Boba Snooze Fest and Ahsoka and Friends as well. So if Disney does decide to make a movie based on Mando, it will have a limited audience, and would only be made for people who actually sat through 2 semi-decent seasons of television and the absolute travesty that was Season 3. Now, all of this could be alleviated if this supposed Mando movie just gets dropped on Disney Plus immediately. But if Disney thinks making a movie out of this and giving it the big blockbuster experience push will result in sales, they're not only insane, but they're really stupid. This movie won't even do Han Solo prequel levels of money at best. Unlike Marvel, which has yet to enter this stage, Star Wars fandom has long been drowning in the trenches of apathy. And most people who care about Star Wars have accepted that the brand is largely dead and will never recover due to the moronic, parasitic relationship it has with Disney. So a Mandalorian film makes about as much financial sense as, say, a second season of Ms. Marvel. They would just be wastes of money in the end, and honestly, I'm even skeptical if Dave Filoni's eventual Heir to the Empire movie is a good idea either. Since not only has Mando fallen off a cliff, but Ahsoka hasn't been able to garner an audience either. And like the Marvels or this Mando film, an Heir to the Empire movie would be the ultimate homework film. Because in order to understand what the hell is happening in that movie, you'd have to watch 3 seasons of Mandalorian, the first season of Ahsoka so far anyway, all of Rebels, probably Andor somehow, and stuff like Boba Fett. The average viewer who hasn't seen anything Star Wars in years will be waltzing into Heir to the Empire like someone whose first MCU film is Infinity War. They'd be bombarded with characters with their brain just going, what the fresh hell is going on here, and you can't blame them. All of this stuff has become too convoluted, and it's why things like Marvel and Star Wars are struggling. Before you had neatly labeled Star Wars movies that said episode 1 through 6, now you got those, plus the new trilogy, and all of these TV shows. It's just too much to keep up with if you're a normal person with a busy life. Hell, this is my job, and even I gotta look at it and go, guys, this is getting ridiculous. How can the average viewer keep up with all of this? They can't. It's no wonder videos where people just summarize movies or shows do well, because there's just too much shit to keep up with, so people just watch or listen to somebody explain the plot in 20 minutes, but even then, thousands or millions of potential viewers still won't even do that. It's the same thing with comics trying to explain to someone where they should start with Spider-Man or Batman. It's impossible. Oh, you just have to read issues 1 to 300 of this run of Spider-Man. But then a relaunch that leads to this story happens and blah 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 blah. Not to mention all the spin-offs and tied-in events. It's just nonsense. It's way too much. No wonder Japanese manga is killing it, because these questions don't exist. Oh, how do I read Attack on Titan? Where should I start? Chapter 1. It's so simple. You don't need 50 tie-in events to understand it. Just read from the one beginning to the end. Boom, you got the whole story, voila. American comics, on the other hand, is a mess in comparison. And that's how these movies feel too, so it's no wonder why none of this stuff is selling. Cause it's all confusing as hell, and not only is it confusing, it's also just really bad and written by people who hate you. This then brings us to this other big culture war battle currently happening, which I became aware of thanks to the channel Yellow Flash. Which, if you aren't subscribed to him, you should be. Anyway, in a previous video I spoke on Glenn O'Leary, who's a comic book store owner who got attacked by woke comic writers, for blaming these morons for why comics are failing. Then those weirdos dogpiled on Glenn and comic book legend Mark Millar that came to Glenn's rescue. He had him on his podcast and they spoke about the state of comics, and from this a new term was invented to personify and identify these woke comic morons. And thus the term cancel pigs was born, and I gotta say I like it. It's clean, it's direct, and it's condescending while also funny. I like the term. It gets 5 SJWs out of 5 from me. Anyway, these cancel pigs have become very angry that not only has the audience rejected them, but comic pros like Mark Millar and Ethan Van Sciver have all denounced them as well. And the culture war is quickly making these cancel pigs get exposed for all the nonsense they rightfully have done. These people are idiots. Anyway, from Bounding Into Comics, we have this article titled, Mark Millar takes a stand against cancel pigs, calls on creators and fans to never ever appease or encourage their cruelties. And following this, these weirdos have gotten angry, like this one cancel pig named Daniel Calvin, who said, surprise surprise, Mark Millar plays to the far-right culture warriors again by supporting the guy who just insulted his fellow comic book creators. Just more of him turning into a far-right jerk. I love this response, because it proves that these cancel pigs have made it their moral duty to ensure their books only adhere to people within their echo chambers. And this latest controversy has exposed them by making these weirdos tell on themselves. A big reason why comics fail, as well as stuff like Hasbro's toys or cards, or Disney's stock and all of it really, is because these idiots all thought it was a good idea to alienate basically half if not more of their audience with political jargon. It's also why stuff like Star Wars and Marvel don't work, because Disney is trying to appease to girls over boys, even though both brands are heavily supported by the male demographic. Well, when it comes to comics, yes, women read them, but let's be real, it's also heavily supported by men. And when you make stuff that rejects your demographic, it's no surprise nobody buys your stuff. It also doesn't help that what's being made sucks too. Like this other cancel pig named Joe Glass who said, getting friendly with Comicsgate, the latest is a fairly friendly response to Ethan Van Sciver, it seems. Also highlighted and defended that comics retailer who basically said comics are dying because people are adding diverse elements to existing characters. Yes, Joe, comic readers are tired of diverse nonsense. Like retconning characters into different sexualities into pandering is not good writing. Nobody cares that you weirdos made Superman's son into a bisexual hero who likes to plow a pink-haired, four-eyed twink. Fans just want to see superheroes punch stuff and be cool. But instead, you weirdos make characters sit around vomiting word salads and talking about their gender constantly. You weirdos turned comics into Tumblr posts and expected people to pay money for it. And that's why you're all failing as you tweet your virtue-signaling stupidity from the comfort of your homes, which you share with your 6 other roommates who all likely can't make rent because you all think the world should revert to communism and accept thoughts and prayers as payment. I'm sick of these commie dummies who can't accept that their ideologies are being rejected for being moronic and weird. One of the more prominent cancel pigs is this Ren famous person who said, starting a thread, respectfully, maybe Mark Millar can look through and understand why people in the comic industry and fans are bristling at the push to blame comic shop problems on diversity of perspective from creators. But here's the thing, if anything, there is no diversity of perspective in comics. It's all the same shit constantly. White man bad, people of color good, pluck every gender under the sun, and put as many flags as you can until the printers run out of ink. The problem is that there is only one perspective, but you weirdos can't accept that, can you? I mean, you all dogpiled Glenn and are now treating Mark Millar like the boogeyman for his opinions, which by the way proves Millar and Glenn right. You dummies don't want diversity of thought. You want everybody to think and act exactly like you, and Mark Millar clapped back by saying, "We know of course what's really going on here. Cancel pigs hunt creators under the guise of virtue because many of them are sociopaths who take pleasure in hurting others. And they really want their jobs. See the current situation at the Big Two for how that worked out." And Millar's right. Why try to climb the ladder of comic books by your sheer talent and ability to write, when you can just pander and get the next person in line cancelled and blacklisted instead? Then you can just waltz into their job without having actually lifted a finger when it comes to working for yourself. And Millar is right. At the end of the day, these cancel pigs are sociopaths and they are emboldened by other cancel pigs. And they are employed by companies like Disney, which are ran by other sociopaths who also echo the same nonsense too. Then Millar said, so many big name creator pals are buzzing about our big enough last week. But it's honestly so easy, just block them and laugh at them, it's meaningless. These people don't even read comics, never ever appease or encourage their cruelties. Ultimately, what this whole cancel pig situation is proving is the same thing as the millions of people who walked away from Disney, or the fans who rejected stuff like diverse Lord of the Rings revisions and Baldur's Gate pandering. These companies and creators only have as much power as the consumer gives them. Once the paying customer walks away, whether it's an apathy or disgust, these morons lose all of their abilities. They don't have cultural control or social significance if the community rejects them and just makes fun of their efforts. There's no win scenario here where any of these people end up rising to the levels of Van Sciver or Millar within their lifetime. People like Millar and more get to where they are because they push their industry forward. They made stuff people care about and are willing to buy, and by catering to his audience over years, that's why Mark Millar's words have such power. The kind of power these cancel pigs would be salivating at the bits to have. But remember that while these commie weirdos tweet from their phones in a house they share with multiple roommates, Mark Millar is laughing as he sits in his big mansion with all the money he made by making things people actually want to read and buy. And I think a good spot to end it here will be what Millar says here as he puts it plainly, some genuine career advice for any wannabe cancel pigs. A huge part of freelance work is your peers' editors wanting to work with you. Everyone just wants to enjoy their job and have fun. If you're toxic, nobody wants to touch you, and many of you are in this place now. You are absolutely not going to get Writer X's job on Batman if you spend 6 months harassing him into self-deletion. You will only be remembered by his editor and peers as someone who tried to bankrupt their pals, and they will never be there for you. Here endeth the lesson. Oh, and nice try to the cancel pigs trying to frame me as a Comicsgate guy, so they can use their typical line of attack. I don't believe in any factions. I'm my own man and I believe in good comics. And that's all Mark has to say. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. If you make good content, people will support it. And the ultimate endgame truth these people along with Hasbro and Disney, which are learning the hard way, is when you make stuff nobody wants, you lose money and relevance. So to all the cancel pigs out there who pander and make stuff nobody likes, and the Hasbro executives confused why Black Aragorn isn't being accepted in more, you all gotta take a look in the mirror and realize what you're doing isn't working. Stop pandering, stop virtue signaling, and come down to the real world and touch some grass. And maybe with some humility, you can all begin to repair the damaged connection you all have with the consumer base at large. But what do I know? I'm just a guy with common sense. But as always, thank you for watching, dear viewer. Subscribe, like, and share the video if you enjoyed it, and thanks to my patrons as always for their support. Never give in to the cancel pigs and always push back against their nonsense. You need to send a message to these people and the companies that what they're doing is not good enough. We can save pop culture and win the war, but until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.